Mackenzie Shirilla didn't get the death penalty, but what she's facing now might be even worse. At just 19, she's already facing decades in prison, her future cut off before it even began. Locked inside a cell, under constant watch, Mackenzie isn't living the teenage life she once imagined. She's living out a sentence that could stretch longer than her entire lifetime. Her world has shrunk to four walls and endless days that blur together. Time itself feels like punishment. For someone who once wanted control over her life, her new reality is the exact opposite. Every choice is gone, every move is monitored, and every day looks the same. She's not treated like a teenager who made a mistake. She's treated like a murderer, a threat that can't be trusted outside those prison walls. And so, she's buried in an environment designed to strip away everything she once knew: friends, family, and a normal future. Some people think prison means just punishment, but for Mackenzie, it's more than that. It's a slow erasure of who she used to be. No freedom, no way out, just a life that feels worse than death. This is the story of Mackenzie Shirilla's prison life, after the crash, after the trial, and after the world stopped forgiving her. But before we understand what her days behind bars look like, we need to go back to the night of the crash, the moment everything changed. On July 31st, 2022, in Strongsville, Ohio, a quiet suburban morning was shattered by a crash that would soon make national headlines. At just 17 years old, Mackenzie Shirilla drove her car into a brick wall at nearly 100 miles per hour. Inside with her were her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his friend, Davion Flanagan. Neither of them survived. Mackenzie, however, walked away with her life, though what came next would change it forever. At first, many thought it was just a tragic accident. A teenager driving recklessly, maybe distracted, maybe speeding. But investigators quickly uncovered something darker. The crash data from her car revealed no signs of braking. Surveillance cameras showed the vehicle accelerating straight into the wall, like a decision made in those final seconds. Prosecutors argued it wasn't a mistake at all. It was intentional. In court, the evidence painted Mackenzie as someone who turned her car into a weapon. The judge noted her actions were not just reckless, but deliberate, and that two young men lost their futures because of it. Mackenzie's defense pushed back, insisting she was too young, too immature to understand the weight of her actions. But the prosecution stood firm. Age didn't erase responsibility. By August 2023, Mackenzie Shirilla was convicted of multiple charges, including murder. At just 19 years old, she was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 15 years. For Dominic and Davion's families, the sentence was a measure of justice, though no punishment could bring their loved ones back. For Mackenzie, it meant her teenage years ended inside a prison cell, with the rest of her life hanging in uncertainty. When the judge's final words echoed in the courtroom, Mackenzie Shirilla was no longer just a teenager on trial. She was an inmate, handcuffed, processed, and stripped of the life she once knew. Her first steps inside prison marked the sharpest break imaginable between freedom and confinement. Intake officers documented her belongings, took her fingerprints, and handed her a uniform that erased the last traces of her teenage identity. The shock was immediate. The cold, bare cell with clanging doors and distant voices was nothing like the bedroom she had left behind. That first night, she lay awake, the silence pressing in as correctional officers patrolled the halls. Friends and family were replaced by strangers in uniforms, and every movement required permission. The sudden loss of control made her realize her old life had ended the moment those cell doors shut. As the days stretched on, the shock of arrival gave way to the rhythm of a world that operated on someone else's clock. Lights flicked on before sunrise, head counts were routine, and meals were served at the same times every day. Her mornings blurred into chores or mandatory programs, afternoons passed under supervision, and evenings ended early as cells were locked tight once more. Her cell became both her world and her cage. Small, impersonal, and stripped of personality, it left her with little to hold on to. Nights were the hardest, hours of silence broken only by the echoes of other inmates. Slowly, the shock of her first days settled into the monotony of repetition, each one feeling like a carbon copy of the last. For Mackenzie, prison life began with fear, but it continued with sameness. And as weeks turned into months, the realization grew clear. This wasn't a temporary adjustment. This was her new reality. As the weeks inside turned into months, Mackenzie began to feel the crushing weight of isolation. While the structured prison schedule kept her physically occupied, it did little to quiet her mind. Nights inside her cell often stretched endlessly, and without distractions from the outside world, her thoughts became heavier. Regret, shame, and hopelessness grew louder with every passing day. For a 19-year-old who had once lived through constant social interaction, friends, family, and digital connection, the sudden cutoff from the outside world was overwhelming. Letters came occasionally, but they couldn't replace human presence. Phone calls were short and expensive, and visits were rare, leaving Mackenzie with long stretches of silence. The loneliness carved deep into her mental state. Depression became a constant battle. The walls of her cell felt like they were closing in, while the repetitive daily cycle created a sense of time standing still. For many inmates, this psychological strain is described as doing time twice, serving the sentence physically while mentally fighting despair. Mackenzie was no exception. Anxiety also played a role, especially as she navigated the unpredictability of prison. The fear of confrontation with other inmates, uncertainty about her future appeals, and the knowledge that her life sentence had no expiration date all added to the mental toll. Although the prison provided limited counseling services, they were not nearly enough for someone her age, facing a lifetime of confinement. Mackenzie had to adapt to surviving largely on her own, trying to cope with the reality of never walking freely outside again. Her struggles highlight a harsh truth. Prison is not only a physical punishment but also a psychological battle. For Mackenzie, the isolation was often more unbearable than the bars themselves. Life inside prison isn't just about dealing with guards and routines. It's also about navigating relationships with other inmates. For Mackenzie, this part of prison life brought its own set of challenges. From the beginning, many inmates knew her story. Some saw her as just another prisoner, while others viewed her differently because of the media attention surrounding her case. Being young and new to the system made her a target of both curiosity and criticism. Older inmates sometimes looked at her as inexperienced, while a few even resented the sympathy her age and circumstances attracted from the outside world. Prison friendships, if they could be called that, often came with conditions. Mackenzie found herself cautious about who to trust, knowing alliances inside could shift quickly. Some inmates tried to pull her into their circles for protection, while others kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with someone who carried the weight of a high-profile conviction. Still, there were moments of uneasy connection. Inmates closer to her age occasionally shared conversations about life before prison, school memories, or family struggles. These talks gave her brief glimpses of normalcy, but they never lasted long. Trust inside prison was fragile, and any sign of weakness could be used against her. Conflicts weren't uncommon. A sharp word, a rumor, or even a misunderstanding could escalate quickly in such an environment. Mackenzie learned to keep a low profile, speaking less and observing more, as a way to avoid unnecessary trouble. Her interactions with others became a survival strategy, balancing between staying connected enough to avoid isolation, yet distant enough to protect herself. In prison, relationships could either make life bearable or far more difficult, and Mackenzie had to carefully walk that line every day. For Mackenzie, the harshest part of prison life wasn't just the walls or the guards. It was the constant reminder of everything she could no longer do. Freedom, something she once took for granted, had been replaced with strict rules that controlled every part of her existence. Simple choices, like when to eat, what to wear, or where to go, no longer belonged to her. Every meal was handed to her at set times. The same uniform was worn day after day, and every movement required permission. Even small things, like listening to music freely, staying up late, or walking outside whenever she wanted, were now impossible. Contact with the outside world was also heavily restricted. Phone calls were short, monitored, and only allowed during approved times. Visits from family or friends required security checks and often left her feeling more empty than comforted once they ended. Letters had to pass through screening, reminding her that privacy was gone forever. The physical restrictions were matched by emotional ones. Holidays, birthdays, and milestones passed without her participation. She could no longer celebrate with friends, go shopping, or even decide what to eat for dinner. It wasn't the walls alone that punished her. It was the constant reminders of what she could never do again, from choosing her own clothes to hearing music without permission. In time, Mackenzie came to understand that this was the core punishment of a life sentence, not just the years behind bars, but the stripping away of independence and choice. It wasn't only about being locked inside, it was about losing control over even the smallest details of her own life. For Mackenzie Shirilla, the reality of a life sentence means one undeniable truth: she will never walk free again. While most people her age look forward to careers, relationships, and building a future, Mackenzie's path is already decided. Every day she wakes up knowing that her entire adult life will unfold within the same walls, with no second chance waiting at the end. Thinking about decades ahead can feel overwhelming. She knows she will grow older in prison, passing milestones like turning 30, 40, and beyond, all without leaving her cell. Time moves differently inside, slow, repetitive, and unchanging, making the idea of a future feel more like an endless extension of the present. In moments of reflection, Mackenzie has been forced to confront not just her circumstances, but also the decisions that led her here. For some inmates, these years bring acceptance, while for others, regret becomes heavier with time. Mackenzie's reflections are complicated. At such a young age, she is still processing the weight of a lifetime punishment, and it's a reality that few teenagers could ever imagine. The long-term picture also raises questions about identity. Who will Mackenzie become after spending decades inside a system that controls her every move? How will the outside world change without her? And what role will she play? These questions remain unanswered, but one thing is certain: her life as she once knew it has ended. For Mackenzie, prison is not just her present, it is her forever. And as the years stretch on, the reflection is clear: freedom was lost in an instant, but the consequences will last a lifetime. Mackenzie Shirilla's story is one of choices, consequences, and a future permanently shaped by a single night. At just 19, she entered a prison system that will now define her entire life. Her case serves as a stark reminder that one decision can close every door to freedom forever. Her days will continue behind locked gates, her youth slipping away in a place that offers no second chances. While the outside world moves forward, Mackenzie remains frozen in time, serving a sentence that will never end. Thank you for watching this video on Crime Shade. If you want to explore more stories about crime, punishment, and life behind bars, make sure to subscribe and stay connected. We'll be bringing you more real cases that reveal the harsh reality of prison life.